Ron, as they say in Southern Delaware, that was worth the trip. Ron, let me begin by thanking you for your passion, intellect, philanthropy, for keeping this organization so relevant. And Dr. Kissinger, Mr. Secretary, you are a friend, a genuine friend. And I understand another friend's here who sometimes gets mad at me, but I love him, Rod Dermer. Where are you, Ron? Are you here? And also the diplomatic representatives from the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, for 8 decades, the World Jewish Congress has fought to make the world a better place. And more equitable, more tolerant, more just, and safe for Jewish people worldwide. This is a matter of our faith. This is a matter of our heritage. And in 1936, amid the gathering darkness of a metastasizing cancer of anti-Semitism, this organization was founded to warn of Hitler's Nazi Germany. And yet, as we know, events unfolded that exceeded even the worst forebodings of the Jews in Europe. 2 years later, 78 years ago, this very night, jackbooted thugs unleashed a pogrom on Jewish people in Germany and Austria. Dr. Kissinger just spoke of it. His family was involved, and maybe some of yours. Ordinary men and women answered the hate-filled call of violence on Kristallnacht, the night that was only the opening assault against the Jewish people. A mere prelude to the genocidal horrors that were to come. So tonight, as we celebrate the World Jewish Congress, I need not tell this audience, but I wish I could tell the whole nation, the whole world. We have to remember that your work, our work, is never done. My great friend, and hard to believe he used to work for me on my staff before he became the leader of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, now as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Tom Lantos. I remember the first time he uttered his saying to me, he wrote it in a speech he wrote for me, with his words. He said, "The veneer of civilization is paper thin, and we are the guardians, and we can never rest." We must confront. We must confront anti-Semitism whenever it occurs. We must continue our work to defeat the stubborn evil of anti-Semitism that still infects too much of our world. The pernicious lies that surface time and again, including here in our own country. We have to speak out every time anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, a lesson I learned early on, regardless of when, regardless of where it is, regardless of when it happens. Some of you may remember toward the end of my chairmanship of the Foreign Relations Committee, I held hearings that outraged everyone on the rising sense of anti-Semitism in Europe. And all our friends were very upset, quote unquote, our allies. But it was rising, and it is again. And the reason we have to, as you know better than I do, indifference is silence, and silence is consent. Silence is consent. I've been really fortunate in my life, my public life, to not only get to know virtually every world leader in the last 40 years, but to make friends with some of the most admirable men in modern history. A great friend, and he was a great friend, counseled me in grief and occasional victory, was Elie Wiesel, who said the opposite, as you know, of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. We see anti-Semitism happening again in a wholesale way, with large parts of the world participating in attempts to delegitimize Israel. Even here at home, calls to boycott, disinvest, sanction Israel. That's why, together with Israel and the EU and Canada, we helped organize the first meeting of the UN General Assembly on combating anti-Semitism. Hard to believe, all these years, the first convention on anti-Semitism in the United Nations. Even allegedly small things matter a great deal. That's why we work to ensure that the United Nations fully recognize Yom Kippur as a holiday. It matters. It matters. Small things matter. With the entire Jewish community, we resoundingly denounced the recent biased and one-sided UNESCO resolution that denied the Jewish history of holy sites in Jerusalem. It is and it must remain part of our national character, the American character, to defend the rights of all people. Because as corny as it sounds, we do hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. The reason the rest of the world repairs to us is not the power of our example, but the example of our power. But the power of our example is really what matters. People don't choose to come here, repair to here, listen to us because of the size of our military. They come because they hope and pray we mean what we say, which we don't always. That's why we defend the rights of all people, Christians, Jews, Muslims, of any faith, of no faith. Because my dad would say, every single solitary person is entitled to be treated with dignity, free of harassment and intimidation, free of the abuse of power. As some of you know, because there's some old friends in this audience, and I apologize for repeating this, but it's important to me anyway. My father was what you'd refer to as a righteous Christian, a high school educated man who was extremely well read, a gracious man. He taught me and my siblings that the ultimate sin was the abuse of power. And the ultimate abuse of power in all of history, he believed, was the Holocaust. He taught me, he taught my children, I taught my children, my grandchildren, that the ultimate guarantor against the return of that abuse of power for Jewish people was the state of Israel. As a student of history, he knew, like all of you, it could happen again. Our dinner table was a place where my father insisted on three things. One, that we had impeccable manners. Two, we never came to the table without a collar on our shirt. And three, we came prepared to talk and discuss. It's a place where we incidentally ate. I really mean it sincerely. My father made sure that my siblings and I understood that indifference did amount to consent. From the turning around of the St. Louis to the failure to bomb the railroad tracks, I don't know how many nights we heard the lessons he taught and things that he thought had happened that were quintessentially un-American in America. He talked about us never forgetting for our own safety's sake as well. And that's why, although I was viewed as somewhat, I occasionally was criticized by my friends, but that's why when each of my children, my deceased son Bo, who was a decorated war veteran, Attorney General of the state of Delaware, my son Hunter, my daughter Ashley, and so far, 3 of my 5 grandchildren, as they each turned the age of 15, I put them on a plane, and the first place I took them in Europe was Dachau. We didn't stop anywhere else. We transferred planes. We went to Dachau, and we spent the day. I was told it's a little too intense, but I didn't believe so, nor did my dad. I wanted them to see for themselves, to touch, to taste, to understand the horrors that can unfold when society grows complacent in the face of evil. Show them the homes that were immediately nearby, pretending they knew nothing about what was happening. Their silence being absolute consent. But equally as important, I wanted them to understand something equally as consequential about the incredible resilience of human nature. The iron will of the Jewish people to rise above these atrocities and make the world a better place, not only for their children, but for all our children, against incredible odds. It's a story you all know. But my guess is, those of you who are my age have a little pang and concern that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren don't fully understand as much as you did what happened. This may be the one audience where that's not occurring. All that my father taught me was driven home to me when, as a 31-year-old kid, just before I sat down at that meeting with Dr. Kissinger, Secretary Kissinger, I visited Israel after the Six-Day War and shortly before the Yom Kippur War. I sat in front of Golda Meir. And those of you who knew her as I got to know her had that sheath of maps behind her. And she'd always turning around and pulling up and down and chain smoking. And she sat there, and I sat next to a guy that I became friends with, her aide, a guy named Itzhak Rabin, who was her aide at the time. Literally, we were both on the other side of the desk. And she had a pointer, and she was pointing and smoking and pointing and reading me letters from the front of people young men who had died and women who had died. And I was getting more and more and more depressed. No, seriously, this is God's truth. I also got ridiculed back then when I was why the Egyptians allowed me to go to the Suez Canal at that time. As I drove out from Cairo to the Suez Canal, I saw all these looked like maneuvering going on, but I couldn't see anything except the dust. And I was told there was sandstorms, but there were no sandstorms in front of me. And I remember telling her that I thought, I'm a 30-year-old kid, okay? I'm the first United States Senator I ever knew. And I'm telling her, I think the Egyptians are getting ready to attack. Remember John Rich, a young Rhodes Scholar who worked for me from the military academy, saying, please don't write that down. They'll think you're crazy. I remember telling her that, and she disabused me of the concern about that. But she just went on and on about 60 million Arabs and 6 million, at the time, 6 million Jews. And all of a sudden she looked at me and she said, Senator, would you like a photograph? And I looked back at her. I wasn't fully accustomed to the protocol. I said, well, yes, Madam Prime Minister. You know those blonde double doors that go out of the office into that sort of mini hallway? We walked outside. We stood side by side, and there were a battery of cameras. No interview, just cameras. Television as well as regular cameras. And I guess I looked very, I looked like that the world was about to come to an end. And she turned to me while still looking at the camera. And she went like this. She said, Senator, don't look so worried. And I turned back, and I like a damn fool, I turned and said, well, Madam Prime Minister, she said, she turned and looked at me, she said, don't worry. We Jews have a secret weapon in our battle with the Arabs. And I thought she was about to tell me about nuclear weapons or something. I swear to God, I thought she was about to confide in me something that I later learned she probably told 100 people this. And she said, I'll never forget what she said. She got very serious. She said, we have a secret weapon, Senator. We have nowhere else to go. We have nowhere else to go. I believe, as all of you do, that the United States has a deep and abiding moral commitment to Israel. We made it just 11 minutes after Israel's founding in 1948. A guarantee of security of Israel. But as I've often said in my 44 years in the United States Senate as Vice President, the God's truth is, if there were no Israel, we would have to invent one for our own safety's sake. That commitment, embraced by every president since Harry Truman. But there have been occasions, like I get a sense there is tonight across this country. There's been occasions in the face of tactical disagreements with Israeli governments, but never a renunciation of the obligation. As I said, I've served with 8 presidents. Due to my deep involvement with American Jewry, the education I received from the community, my engagement with the state of Israel, I've observed unease that often accompanies a transfer of power that occurs under our Constitution every 4 years. It doesn't always result in the transfer of power, but when it does. I watched it when, as Ron will tell you, when Senator Obama and I were elected President and Vice President. Many of you would say, I know you, Joe, but I don't know about that other guy. You're all smiling, but you know it's deadly true what I say. No administration in its history has done more to enhance Israel's security than this administration, including to my friend Bibi, and he is my friend. I told the ambassador that he showed me when I was having dinner with my wife and I were having dinner with he in his home in Jerusalem. He walked me to the library. He probably just took it out because I was there, but there's a picture I had autographed for him back when he was at the embassy as a counselor and I was a young senator. And I said, Bibi, I don't agree with the damn thing you say, but I love you. And I do. I might add in a point of personal privilege that when my son Bo died, the first person to call me was Bibi, and spent a long time with me on the phone, and then called again, and again, and again. But even Bibi acknowledges that in terms of raw security, culminating in this security assistance agreement with Israel of $38 billion over the next 10 years, the single largest pledge of military assistance in the history of the United States of America that we've ever made. Now there's a new transition going on, following an even more divisive campaign, one of the most divisive campaigns in modern American history. And a number of my friends in the community are anxious about what it will mean for America's commitment to Israel. I stand here to tell you that I have no doubt, none whatsoever, that in the Trump administration there will be no diminution of support as a consequence of this transition. Even if the new administration were inclined to reduce the commitment, which it is not, Congress would never let it happen. The American people would never let it happen. That's the point I want to make to all of you. You measure your influence on how well you influence me, presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, senators, congressmen. But your influence on the American community at large has been profound. That's the ultimate guarantor that every American president in every transition will never dare, even if they were inclined, and the Trump administration is not inclined, to reduce the nature of sport. There'll be tactical disagreements. There always are. Hell, the old joke you all know and you taught me. You get two Israelis on a street corner, you get three opinions. Well, there's going to be disagreements tactically, but never on the basic fundamental commitment. So let me conclude by thanking you all again for what you do, not only to protect American Jewry at home and around the world, by association what you do to protect every single minority in the United States of America. You really do. I think you intend it, but even if you didn't intend it, that's the consequence of what you do. The second point I'd like to make to you is, in addition to thanking you, I've always believed that the value of an award lies in the esteem in which you, or in this case I, hold the group that's bestowing it. This means a great deal to me personally. It is true, and I make no apologies for it, and I said it when I was 34 years old in a controversial election in my state with less than 1% of the state being Jewish. I am a Zionist. You need not be a Jew to be a Zionist. And for 80 years, this organization has held aloft a beacon of righteousness for the whole world to see. The third point I'd like to make is I am genuinely humbled to be numbered in the company of those who have received this award in the past. The list of some of the finest human beings and men I've ever worked with in my life. And it's among my greatest honors and things that I can leave to my children for their memory. That I can count among the 7, 3 of them as personal friends. No one taught me more about the incomparable resilience of the human spirit in the face of tragedy than Elie Wiesel. Even before I knew him formally, when I lost my wife and daughter, shortly after I got elected, before I was sworn in on a tractor trailer broadsided them, I got a call from a guy named Elie Wiesel. When I was hospitalized and told my chances weren't all that great with a couple cranial aneurysms, Elie Wiesel. One of the great compliments was that he came in to see President Obama and said he thought I had character. It was the ultimate affirmation in me of my self-worth. And he also put it so beautifully. He said, because I remember I despair, because I remember I have a duty to reject despair. My dad said a little differently. Everyone will be knocked down. The measure of success is whether you can get back up and how quickly. Despite all Elie endured, he never missed the opportunity to teach us about our responsibility to one another as human beings. He was a rare soul. And thank God I had an opportunity to present an award to him and see him and talk to him just about 6 weeks before he died. I'm honored to speak. I was honored to speak last month at a memorial service in Washington, D.C. for the great Shimon Peres. I understand his son and daughter-in-law are here this evening. I want to say thank you for the opportunity to let me do his eulogy in Washington, memorial service at the synagogue. I believe Shimon Peres embodied the spirit of the Israeli people. He was, in my people, the conscience and the soul of Israel, in addition to being one of the founders. And I was blessed to call him a friend. I don't say that, but he called me a friend, which you have no idea how much that meant to me. And last but clearly not least, Secretary Henry Kissinger. In 1972, I ran for the United States Senate because I disagreed with the foreign policy of the administration in Southeast Asia. That's why I ran as a 29-year-old kid, not old enough to be sworn in once elected. And my initial encounter was, as Dr. Kissinger pointed out. What he didn't tell you was, I showed up at a hearing. It was going to be a closed hearing. We didn't have those special secure rooms in those days like we have in S-407 now, and where they're totally secure skiffs, as we call them. And they used to run music through the walls of the Foreign Relations Committee and the committee hearing room and meeting room on the Senate floor. There's only two committees that have rooms in the United States Senate building, the Appropriations Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. And I didn't put on the committee recently, but I didn't know there was such a room in the United States Senate. So I dutifully showed up for the hearing where, quote, Secretary Kissinger is going to give, quote, his world view. And we knew it was about Vietnam and whether or not we were nearing the end or the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. And so I showed up dutifully on time. The hearing was supposed to begin at 10. My recollection was it was a spring day because it was hot outside, warm. And I sat in the Hart building. I was waiting, and I kept looking at my watch. And it was 5 after, 10 after. No one was there. And the horseshoe that you sit in, I was at the very end on the left side, the Democrats. And finally, a young secretary walked out and said, "Senator, can I help you?" I said, "Yes, I'm here for..." She said, no, that's over in S-107. I'm thinking, where in the hell is S-107? She said, it's over in the Capitol. So I literally sprinted across the lawn between the Capitol and the Hart Building. And I was perspiring like hell. I came in the ground floor door underneath the steps, and I ran straight ahead. And I ran in, I found the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I'm looking up at those little brass plates above each door. And I turned right, came all the way around, and finally I came back almost where I began, and there it is, that's 107. And they have louvered doors on the outside. And so I open the louvered door, it opens out, and with that, Capitol policeman grabbed me by the shoulder, spun me against the wall, and said, "Where the hell do you think you're going, kid?" I feel kind of stupid. And I said, I'm a U.S. Senator. He said, "Oh, my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that." He didn't ask me for identification. He believed me when I said it. Now I was really tight, and I had practiced the questions I were going to ask Henry Kissinger. And I walked in the door, and some of you I know the room. There used to be a set of filing cabinets on the right-hand side as you walked in, and this great large table about the size of the one in the Oval Office, and where we occasionally meet, the cabinet room. And it has a brass handle and opens inward. It's a French door. And there's no retaining device in the door because of the frescoed walls and ceiling. So I pushed the door open, and it slipped out of my hand and smashed against the filing cabinet. And about 14 senior senators had a coronary arrest. Everybody's like, and I literally found myself upon the back of Henry Kissinger. As you walk in, if you've been in that room, it's like no further from me to you for the chair where the witness sits. And I was mortified. I looked around for the first open seat. I sat down, making myself the second ranking member of the committee. Oh, God. And Senator Fulbright had excused himself to go on the floor to make a speech after he had heard the testimony. And Senator Mansfield was the majority leader and the acting chairman. And he spoke in very crisp tones. And he said, everybody had asked a question, anyone have anything else to ask? And I had practiced, and with temerity and as senatorial voice as I could muster, I said, "Mr. Chairman, yes, I do." And he said, "Go ahead." And with that, I said, and that's when I started to say, "Mr. Secretary," and Secretary Kissinger said, "I thought no staff was allowed." And with that, I could see Assistant number 2 guy at the State Department, Joe Sisko, write on a blank piece of paper, "Biden-Delaware." and he slid it over to Kissinger, to Dr. Kissinger. And Secretary Kissinger looked up and said, "Oh, Senator Biden, I'm sorry, I didn't know." And what always got me in trouble, I was somewhat irreverent. I said, "Secretary Dulles, it's no problem, none whatsoever." That's how we started our relationship. But over the years, I've profited by his friendship, by his wisdom, the incredible breadth of knowledge he possesses. I would argue unlike any other leader in the world today. He doesn't have a rival, in my view, in the entire world. For the breadth and depth of his knowledge and the profundity of his strategic thinking. So, Mr. Secretary, if you're still here, thank you for always being my reality check. Thank you for being willing to talk to this Democrat over all those years in the middle of difficult times with Republican and Democratic administrations. I've called and saw his counsel. I consider him a great friend. And Ron, you as well. Ron, I may be leaving the government, but my commitment to the cause of world Jewry and the World Jewish Congress is going to stand for a long time. My father used to have an expression. He said, "It's a lucky man or woman gets up in the morning, puts both feet in the floor, knows what they're about to do, and thinks it still matters." This still matters a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.